Okay, I see. Probably my instruction is reaching you late. I see many more plus ones. Once all of you become silent, I'll start with the lecture. Till then, I'll be in a blocked state. Yes, that's what I'm looking. How can we correct this? Okay, it's visible now? Okay. Uh, Everything clear from yesterday's lecture? Any doubts? Am I audible till the end? Okay. So yesterday we were talking about this example of Microsoft Word, and we were wondering about how we accomplish so many things together. As I'm typing, there is a spell check which is running. As I'm typing, maybe it's also loading certain images. So you might have realized sometimes when you edit a document in Google Doc or maybe even in Microsoft Word, it takes it some time to bring your images to the document, but till then you can still type, right? It doesn't take away your typing capability. So till I do not explicitly specify in today's lecture, I am strictly talking about a uniprocessor system. So I have still not come to a multiprocessor system. The moment I'll start talking about multiple cores, I'll let you know, right? So everything which we are discussing as of now is only for a system having one core. And so is the difference between concurrency and parallelism clear, right? No? Okay. So I'll repeat it again. So concurrency, you can say it's like a fake parallelism, which we have been talking till now in this course, right? So our operating system, it's executing multiple processes for you, right? But it is not executing them one after the other. So sequential is something which you do one after the other. So you may have written a piece of code in which every line executes one after the other. That is sequential. So I execute part one of your code, then I execute part two, then I execute part three. That is something which is sequential, right? Concurrency is, so you can also see it in your normal life. So if you do one task, second task, third task, you have done them sequentially. Now, concurrently is you do some part of this task, then you jump, do some part of this task, jump, do some part of this task. That is what operating system has been doing for us till now. Right? It's shifting between the processes. It executes one, then another, then third, then one, then another, then third. So this is concurrency. You are not doing things sequentially, but it is giving you an illusion of parallelism, but still there is no actual parallelism in your system. At a time, only one thing is happening. Parallelism is the actual parallelism, when you can do multiple things at once with the help of multiple cores, right? So I'm currently talking about concurrency, where you have only one CPU in your system and it is sort of switching so quickly between your processes that you feel everything is being done at the same time, where actually it is not. Only one process is running at a time. That is concurrency. Okay. So I'm going to talk everything about from the perspective of concurrency now. Okay, so we had some ideas yesterday. So we were thinking about how this Microsoft Word will actually operate in such a case where multiple things are happening at a time, right? So we had this idea that we can make each functionality a separate process. So as of now, anyhow, whenever I click on Microsoft Word, it is only one process which I am executing. But with time, the idea was maybe this one process, it can create multiple child processes, and then all those child processes, they can communicate with each other, right? But that idea, it has some problems here, as you see in the third point above. So all these child processes, they'll have to communicate with each other. So whatever the user is typing, at least that block and more than definitely more other things will have to be shared between all these processes which are running concurrently, again, not parallelly. How do you share, that is the question. So we had two protocols. I'll either use message passing or I'll use shared memory. So message passing is nothing but it is actually shared memory where you share memory in the kernel space. So kernel takes care of that. That's why you have to send messages to the kernels, and it actually increases a lot of overhead for your system, because anytime whenever a process it wants to talk to another process, it will have to reach out to kernel, right? And then kernel will be executing some process which will be a system process. So your entire system mode, it will change from a user mode to the kernel mode, right? So kernel mode, it runs with a higher authority. It has access to more resources. So context switching definitely takes time, but then the context switching from a user process to a user process and context switch from a user process to system process, they are again two different things. And if you are doing a context switch from a user process to a system process, it will take all the more time, right? So that's why we want to use this concept of inter-process communication there. Furthermore, there is so much of data to share. If I have written a document of 20 pages, how many messages will you pass? So this message passing protocol, it can be useful if you have to share maybe one integer or an array or some limited amount of data, but I cannot just keep passing messages in my system just like that. Another approach was shared memory. We can use that. That is still more hopeful as compared to message passing in this particular case, but we have a better idea than that, which we will discuss today. Another problem which it will create, having multiple processes, right? So Microsoft Word, it's not just running those 3 processes concurrently. There might be some 20 processes which might be running for you. And then let's say you start working with spreadsheet, it will again create some 30 processes, and you start some other application. So whenever you start an application, if it starts creating processes of its own, how many processes will be there in your system? So the first day when we looked at the task manager, we saw that there were close to 100 and something processes, right? So definitely that is not the case, because otherwise every process, it will give rise to a lot of processes and number of processes will become very high in my system, but that doesn't happen. So we have an alternate solution for this. So the idea is, if you have multiple processes and they want to work on a big pool of shared data, there is a whole lot of data which they want to share. So I won't keep them as separate processes. I'll keep, so let's say there are 3 pieces of code I have, and these 3 pieces of code, they want to work on a very big chunk of shared data. So I'm not going to keep these 3 codes as 3 different processes. I'm going to have all of them as a single process sitting inside one code. Now the question is, then how do we achieve concurrency? Right, if I have only one code which is not allowed to create any child process, then how do we have concurrency in the system? Any ideas? I'm coming there. So the solution is threads, as you rightly said. But as for the time being, let's keep our memory fresh. Let's forget about what we already know. Let's think from a fresh perspective. Assume you do not know anything about threads, then how will you do it? You don't know what are threads. So can you make a piece of, can you make a code operate in such a way that it executes its different parts concurrently? So if I write it down here, so let's say here is this big code you have. This code has these 3 codes, C1, C2, C3, right? And the idea is to actually execute C1 for some time, then execute C2 for some time, then execute C3 for some time, and then sort of repeat it. So we had one idea for this yesterday, right? The use of a for loop. So the idea was, I'll use a for loop and maybe I can keep C1, C2, C3 there. So let's say these are actually 3 modules. So keep a for loop here, and then let's say M1 runs for some time, M2 runs for, M3 runs for some time. But if I look at it, it's actually not achieving that. It's still sequential, even if you have it in a for loop, right? It will execute M1 completely, then it will execute M2 completely, then it will execute M3 completely. But I don't want to do that. M1 should, some lines of M1 should execute, then some lines of M2 should execute, then some lines of M3 should execute. How do we do that? So if you look at it, it is what I'm trying to do here. Can I say it's some kind of intra-process context switch? So till now, when we were talking about the operating system, we were talking about inter-process context switch. Context switches were being done by the operating system and they were between the processes. Now what I'm looking for is, in a process, I actually have something which are called mini processes, and I want to achieve some kind of context switch between these mini processes. So there are actually constructs to do that. And there are two ways in which you can do it. So the first idea is you yourself write a code for this. So today every system has this multi-threading capability. Previously it was not there. So users themselves had to do this. Right? So how do you write a piece of code which sort of achieves concurrency between these modules? So if you look at this figure here, this will make the idea slightly clear. So when I was talking about a process, you see a process on the left hand side. So although you see one thread here, so the idea is this entire process is just one process. It doesn't have like multiple parallel processes which you want to run. And this was the address space of this process which would sit in the memory and you'll execute it. What we are now looking for is this one process. It has these three mini processes which we also call as threads. Threads is a jargon for that. It has these three mini processes and I want to context switch between these three. Right? So this entire data, it is shared between all these three processes, the code, the data, the global data, and the files also. So if there are some file pointers, all of these mini processes are going to use those files. Now, I want a context switch to happen between these, right? So actually all of you can write code for this if you dig it in a bit deeper on Google. So what you can do is, you can actually have a mechanism where I can say it like you yourself implement a mini scheduler and a mini dispatcher in your code. Right, so your code will have a component which will accomplish this. So your code will know, okay, fine, these are the three things which I have to process together. So it can maybe keep a track of where is the instruction pointer for this thread, where is the instruction pointer for this, where is the instruction pointer for this. So that data we need to maintain. So that data go in the register part of each stack, each thread. And this register part will have more things. So the idea is when this first thread runs on your computer, all these registers, they will be loaded in the CPU, you'll do some work, and then now when you want to context switch between the threads, so please note that now you are doing this context switch. You need to have policies in your code so that you can context switch between the threads, and there are libraries to do that. So there are libraries with which you can actually pull the context from the CPU, so that will give you an idea of what your process looks like in the CPU, and then you can have it back. Just give me a moment. Okay, and then you can put it back also. So in this case, what I'm doing, what I'm saying, it's your job to actually do all of these functionalities here. These stacks are if these threads in case call their own function. So we need some stacks for pushing the parameters and other things. Is everything clear till now? So make sure you ask me if you have any doubts. So multi-threading is actually a topic which is least understood in operating systems. I'm trying to make it as clear as I can. Any doubts still now? Okay. So now the whole idea is you have a code here, and in this code you have implemented your own scheduler and you have your own dispatcher which does all these things for you. Sorry. Okay. So the whole idea here is it is you who are switching between these threads, right? So these kind of threads, we call them user threads. We also call them fibers in some cases. And it's totally the responsibility of programmer to achieve such a functionality. And definitely it's not easy to write such a piece of code, right? So you have to implement your own libraries for this. So if you Google it, it's actually even given as a programming assignment in many of the first courses on operating systems, that you yourself write a library to implement user level threading. Okay. There is one more thing which you can do. So before coming there, let's talk about this. So whenever we do scheduling, we previously needed something which we called a process control block. So there was a queue which had all these process control blocks, and we used them for our scheduling purposes, right? So in this case also, I should have something similar like this. So for each thread, maybe I should have a thread control block. And what this thread control block will have? Nothing but these two things, registers and stacks. So whenever I have to do a context switch between two threads, so that I can get these data from thread control blocks. So normally this thread control block, if you look at it, it will be very smaller than a process control block, because it is not having all these additional data, code data and files that is being shared between all the threads. And normally we also do not call them a thread control block. We have something which is called a thread table. And this thread table, it ensures that you have all the context of all the threads stored, whatever you need while context switching. Where will this thread table sit? It should occupy some space in memory. So where do you think it should be there in memory? Right now, user is implementing everything. Everything is at a very code level. Kernel has nothing to do with it. So this thread table, it actually sits in the address space of this entire process, right? So I have, yes. I am coming there. You can implement them in kernel space also. So I am slowly coming there. So currently I'm talking about just implementing them in the user space, right? Because we are, as of now, talking about concurrency, right? And definitely this, you cannot achieve like full potential of your system using this kind of threading. That is obvious here, right? We can only context switch between the threads, and we are assuming that we have a single processor. I'll come there. Okay, so this thread table, it sits into the address space of your process. So it's actually inside the user space part of your memory. And then definitely kernel, it doesn't have any knowledge about this thread table. So kernel in this particular case, it has nothing to do with threading here. You yourself are making your code in such a way that it executes some part, and then some other part. Kernel has nothing to do with it. Okay. So what are the possible advantages and disadvantages of this? Let me come there. So if we talk about this particular kind of multi-threading. So let me say till now I had a uniprocessor system. So I was I was using this kind of threading in my system. And then my father gives me a gift and I have this multi-core processor. So if I'm doing this kind of multi-threading, will that new system be of any use to me from a programming perspective? No, right? Because this kind of threading, I'm only doing it inside my process, right? So when kernel actually schedules my process, kernel has no idea which particular thread is running. For kernel, it is just executing the process. That is me who is just saying, okay, well, in this process, now you execute this thread, now you execute this different thread. Kernel is just executing the process. So if it gives 2 milliseconds of time quantum to my process, the process will only run for 2 milliseconds. It's up to me which particular thread I want to schedule in that particular 2 milliseconds. So that's why it has some obvious disadvantages. So one disadvantage is if at a particular time, let's say one of these threads or one of these fibers actually have a scanf statement. What do you think will happen? Will other thread execute or not? So I would want it to, right? Only then I'm making the perfect use of multi-threading. But will it in actual, in this particular case, it will not. Because for kernel, it's just executing a process, and that process issued a scanf command. So it took the process to the blocked state. And the entire process in the blocked state, no thread can run, right? Also, if one of the thread, it has a segmentation fault, the entire process will be killed. Right? So whenever I talk about multi-threading, the notion which we had in our minds is, okay, well, I'll divide my process into multiple parts and I'll run it on all different cores. I'll do a lot of stuff. Maybe even if one thread does something wrong, others will still execute and give me the data. That is the whole idea of using multi-threading, but nothing is really being accomplished here. So why would I use this kind of threading? And it's also actually cumbersome to write user level threads on your own. So all the threading libraries which you use, most of them actually create kernel threads and not user threads, about which I'll talk in a while. So they were actually in use before. You can also use them today, depends on the kind of application you are building. So one very big advantage of user level threads is the context switch here is very fast, right? So it's the context switching which is happening at a very user level. So for context switching between threads, you do not have to invoke any system call. You do not have to ask the kernel, okay, well, switch the context. So if kernel switches the context, it's an extra overhead. It takes a lot of time. So if you have a small application and you are just only looking for concurrency and no parallelism, then better to go with the user level threads. Now comes the second idea. So to now use threads to their full potential, we have something which is called the kernel level threads. Right. So this kind of threading, you can do it with the threading libraries which are implemented. So in C it is pthread. I don't know exactly what it is in Python. I used it long back. So those threading libraries, they allow you to do threading at a very kernel level. So you can actually create threads, and now this thread table which was being created, it will not be in the user space, it will be in the kernel space, right? And kernel will now actually treat each of your thread as a separate mini process, right? So now how should I put it? So now you can make use of multiprocessors. So now is when multiprocessors come in picture. So previous now if you have multiple processors, you can have many kernel level threads, and kernel will take care to schedule all these threads on different cores, and you can have the actual parallelism. So the problem here, as I said, is it takes too much time for a context switch here between two threads because it is done by kernel. So first thing, definitely the context switch between two threads will take less time as compared to the context switch between two processes. Can someone give me the reason? I don't know if I have talked about this before. Why would a thread level context switch take less time than a process level context switch? Right? Because I do not have to care about all these data, code data in files. All of this remains the same. So in the context switch, the only things which I have to load and store are these registers and stacks and nothing else. So that's why it is faster. Okay, so coming to the user kernel level threads. So the idea is, let us say in a user level thread, I have an application where, let's say I want some 10 parts of the code to run concurrently. So I can have 10 threads in my system, and you can even have 100 threads if you want. What if you make 100 kernel level threads? It's going to be a whole lot of overhead on your system, and I doubt any one of you have ever created. So generally whenever we talk about multi-threading, maybe we'll just create 4 threads or 6 threads, but not something like 100 threads or 200 threads, and it will make your system very slow. So one of the ideas is you can actually combine user level thread and kernel level thread. So before coming there, make this point very clear that you can achieve two things with threads. One is concurrency and other is parallelism. User level thread only gives you concurrency. It doesn't give you parallelism, and kernel level thread, it gives you both concurrency as well as parallelism. Now, there is something which is called mapping. You can map some user level threads to the kernel level threads. So what that mapping is actually, many of you might have heard about it. So there are 3 kinds of mapping, which is many to one, one to one, and many to many. So you can use thread libraries to do this kind of mapping. So many to one is actually what we just talked about as the very first thing. So we say that we have many user level threads, and having user level threads means these are the mini processes. User is doing the context switch between them. Kernel is not aware to about them. So for kernel, it is like only one process. So that's why we call it, yes, that's why we call it many to one. So one kernel thread, it is mapped to many user threads. So for kernel is going to look at this entire thing as a one process, but for user, these are multiple fibers which are running. And as we discussed, this one only gives you concurrency, and the context switch here are fast as compared to the kernel level threads. The second one, which is one to one, is nothing but the kernel level thread which we talk about. So every user level thread is actually also a kernel level thread. So kernel takes care of all these context switches, and this one gives you parallelism. But this one will make your system slow. So we use something which is called a hybrid approach, which we call many to many. So what we do in such cases, I can actually make 100 user threads, or let me say I make some 10 user threads. What I can do is I can map these to the kernel level thread. So I can say that maybe these 3 user threads, they will map to one kernel thread. These 3 user level threads map them to one, and let's say these 2 map them to one. I'll just remove this one. So what is happening? Kernel will now look at it as 3 threads. And for these 3 threads, you can actually run them parallelly. These 3 threads, you can run them parallelly. So this one, might be on core 1, this one might be on core 2, this one might be on core 3, and then on core 1, these 3 user level threads, they can run concurrently, right? So I can sort of run this process at, if I look at it, this entire thing as a process, I can run it on 3 cores at a time, right? And on all those 3 cores, I'm achieving concurrency with the user level threads. Okay. So we discussed this. So this is called the hybrid approach. Okay, now let's shift gears and come back to where we started this week with. So we were talking about scheduling. So now we understand that there can be a whole lot of processes running on my system. So you can also look at how many threads are running on your system, and you can definitely see that number of threads is way, way higher than the number of processes. So what is happening, instead of each process is making processes, it is creating threads, and that's allowing it a very quick context switch. So things are being done faster. Now I have a system which has a lot of threads running, which has a lot of processes running. So previously when we talked about scheduling, we talked about how scheduling happens on a uniprocessor system. So now let's just try to think about, so today definitely all of us have multi-cores. So it's useful to think about how will you do scheduling in that case. Right, so I hope scheduling in uniprocessor system is very clear to all of you. So even if you don't remember all the scheduling algorithms, the overall idea is that there is a scheduler, it has a ready queue, it implements some algorithm and it chooses one process out of the ready queue to schedule on the processor. And as soon as the time quantum expires or the CPU becomes idle, it will choose some other process and keep it on the CPU. Now the idea is I have multiple CPUs. How do I do scheduling now? So give me some ideas, some logical ideas. How can I do that? I'll have to remove this, yes. Okay, we can do the same thing for each processor. That is one idea. Okay, any other idea? Okay, we need to manage the process. We probably need an algorithm for that. Okay. Okay, what about this? So this is the first idea which came in my mind when I thought about it. Anyhow, let's say previously I had one core, and this one core, it was running some scheduler. It was taking some processes from the ready queue and it was executing them. Now I have 3 more processors. So I actually do not need to change many things. Anyhow, there is one scheduler which has an algorithm which is running. It can give me one process. So if I have 4 cores, I'll ask it to give me 4 processes. So let's say I'm implementing FCFS. I'll say, okay, don't give me just one process, give me the 4 processes which arrived first in the system, and then I'll execute these on these 3 processors. We can do that. Any problems with this? Okay, so I hope you mean what you are saying is load balancing problem, right? One. What I can do is, let's say when the system starts, I choose 4 processes, I give it to each CPU. As soon as the CPU becomes idle, I get one process and give it to you. As soon as some other CPU become idle, I get one more and give it to this. So is there a problem of load balancing here? So I'll do the scheduling only when a processor becomes idle. Right, that way it won't happen that one processor is sitting idle and other is having a lot of things to do. Okay, so we can have that. So that is one idea. Each processor can have its ready queue. I'll come to that. So currently I'm working with just this very basic idea that there is only one queue and there is one processor which is taking care of scheduling and giving it to all the other processors, right? So what things can go wrong there? There is a very fundamental issue when we do scheduling on multiprocessor systems, and that has something to do with your hardware. So if you remember, we talked about cache memory. Cache memory creates a lot of troubles here. It doesn't create trouble for a uniprocessor system, but as soon as you have multiple cores, each of which is having a cache of itself, things go haywire. Any idea what might go wrong?
You started a processor on one core and you save its memory in that, if that cache was one. By the time you start again, it's another processor and you don't have the cache saved.
Yes, right. So that is one thing that will result in some overhead. Come again. Cache coherence issue. So what exactly is that?
Yeah, as you said, if one process starts running, before we set that process is running state, the next process, once it gets it might take the same process and start running. So we'll have the same process running in two processes. It is redundant. Yeah, it becomes redundant.
So we already computed a process.
We are mixing two things here. So we were talking about cache, right? We were not talking about one process being executed by two CPUs. There is one ready queue, right? Anyhow, so whenever I decide that I'm
Where after the process is being executed, it has some data which has to be stored. Then when it's being worked again, you pick it up from the register. So suppose you started the process in one processor, and then you're doing it in another processor because of this queue. So you will lose the data that you've already stored. You have to do it again. It's redundant.
So redundancy is one thing. Worse, it can also lead to some inconsistency and incorrect results. So let's see how it happens. It's not exactly. Yes. Yes, so that comes more at the architecture level. We can have a common cache. There are architectures which have a common cache, right? So yes, so there are pros and cons of every kind of architecture. So currently the architecture which I am talking about is each CPU having its own cache, right? So the data inconsistency issue here is not much like the race condition. So let me give you a brief overview of what exactly cache is doing and how things are becoming difficult here. So what happens is, let me take an example. Let's say I have a loop here which runs 10 times. So let's say let me say something like while 10 times, something like this. This loop is running 10 times and I am doing I++ in this loop. Right? So cache actually does two kind of things. So what is the role of cache? The role of cache is it is faster than the main memory. So whenever a process, whenever the CPU, it has to get some data from the main memory, it takes it some time. So taking it from the cache is fast. So what it can do, it can get some popular data as well as some popular instructions. We'll see what is the meaning of popular from your main memory to the cache. Now, what is that popular? Popular can be based on two ideas. One is temporal, one is spatial. So temporal is something which is being accessed very frequently. Makes sense to keep it in cache, not to go there back again and again. So something which is happening in a while loop like this. So here I is being accessed again and again, and also this instruction I plus is being accessed again and again. So makes sense to keep both of these in cache, right? So processor will keep both of these data as well as, so let's say the value of I is 1 at the starting, the address of I, and it will also keep this instruction and the address of the particular instruction here. So that is what it does. Another thing which it does is what we discussed before. So whenever I have to execute an instruction, I have to read it from the RAM, and somehow I understand that all the consecutive instructions will also be of the same process. So instead of getting one instruction, why don't get a block of instructions and keep it in cache? That is something spatial related to space. So that is the notion of popularity. So the whole idea is I keep some data here in the cache. So now whenever a data is needed or whenever an instruction is to be executed, so we have those registers, right? Instruction address register, data register, which hold the addresses of which data I have to access or which instruction I have to execute. So CPU anyhow has the address. It first checks inside cache, right? If it finds that address inside the cache, it will access the variable right from here. Otherwise, it will go to the main memory and get it. We'll talk about it later. Now the problem is CPU reads this cache not only just to read the data not just to read the data but also write some data. So in this case, if you see, I am doing I++. So I is somewhere sitting in the main memory also, and whenever this loop executes, I have to increase the value of I. Right? If cache was not there, every time I++ would happen, CPU would have to change this value in the main memory. So actually CPU does not do that. CPU change the value of I in the cache and not in the memory. So that is the problem which happens. So let's say I'm running this process on your core 1. Core 1 has its own cache. It does, let's say, for 5 times this loop executes and the value of I becomes 5, not in the main memory but in the cache of this particular processor. And when will it write back from the cache to the main memory? When it has to, you can say, flush the cache, or I have to get some new data into the cache. That time you can make the changes in the main memory. But as of now, the value of I is 5 here. Then what happens? A context switch happens. This process goes back in the ready queue with all the registers and states. What will happen? Next time when I schedule this process, so in a uniprocessor system, it would come back to the same CPU and this 5 would be still there. The CPU would work with that. But now if you schedule it to a different CPU, right, this variable I is not present in the cache of that CPU because it has never run there. So this time it will get the data from memory where I will still be 1 and not 5. So this actually is cache coherence. It not only creates the entire thing burdensome, it also makes it wrong, it also makes it inconsistent. So we have various ways of solving this cache coherence problem using different kind of architectures, using some synchronization primitives. If you have heard about bus snooping, that is something which is used. So I can actually have certain things here to ensure that all the caches remain in the same state. Okay. So the whole motivation of why I told you this is you cannot just like that run any process anywhere till you fix this cache coherence issue. Once you fix this cache coherence issue, yes, you can schedule anything anywhere. But then we have the problem which you talked about. Again, I should not do that, although I can do that because then I'm not utilizing caches. So first I'm running this process on CPU 1. I'm not actually I'm utilizing its cache, and then I shifted it to another CPU, right? So this cache which was filled with the data of this process becomes useless. So this thing, it is called cache affinity. So whenever I'm running a particular process on a particular CPU, I'll actually I run it on the same CPU again and again. Okay. So the first approach here, which we just now discussed about, which so your idea was something else. My idea was have a single CPU which does this scheduling for all the other CPUs, and it sort of divides the job between them. It gives processes to all of them. It has its obvious disadvantages. What if I take a mini hammer and smash this core on my system? The entire system will go away, right? The system doesn't become resilient. So if something happens to one core, or this master core which was doing the scheduling thing, everything just goes away. Okay, even if I do not smash it, even if it is still running, even then it has a problem. The problem is of the resource contention. So there is this one processor which is doing the scheduling for you. So every time any processor needs a new becomes idle and requires a new process, it will have to wait for this one processor. And this one processor, the master processor, master CPU, it's also doing a lot of other things other than scheduling. So it will take some time in serving them. And assume that what if it's a 64 CPU system, every CPU will be waiting for this one CPU to schedule its jobs. So that are the disadvantages of this. It is called asymmetric multiprocessing system, and it is mostly not used. What is used is symmetric multiprocessing system. Just a second. Symmetric multiprocessing system where every CPU can do its own scheduling. So anyhow, I have this code for scheduler. I can run it for all the processes. Now the question comes to ready queue. right? Should I have one ready queue or should I have multiple ready queues? So if I have one ready queue, so the idea is there is this in this RAM there is this one ready queue in which all the ready processes they are sitting, and whenever a processor it becomes idle, it can get a process from the ready queue. It can run its own scheduling policy and it can get a process from the ready queue. Now what can be the problem here? Yes, there is a problem of duplicacy and redundancy. What if in 1/10 of a second of a particular second, two CPUs they pick the same process, and actually there is a very high probability of this happening, right? There are actually, let's say 64 CPUs, or let's say even 4 CPUs. There are so many contexts which is happening in my system. This short-term scheduler it runs very frequently, so there is a very high chance that this short-term scheduler will run at the same time for two different CPUs and they pick the same process and start executing it. Right? So then you can have some policies for that. So one policy, it is called locking. We'll look at it in synchronization. So locking is mostly what if I know that one CPU is already using the ready queue for scheduling. I don't use it. The other CPU don't use it. And how do you achieve locking? You can have a shared variable, right? So what you can do, whenever any CPU it has to access the ready queue, it will make its value 1. So 1 signifies that the ready queue is under use, and as soon as it schedules it can set it back to 0. So any CPU it uses the ready queue only when the value of that variable is 0. But then again, contention issue is again here, right? So the ready queue is same. So if there are 64 CPUs, there is a good chance that all of them will just keep waiting if I have this kind of a locking primitive here, because everyone wants to schedule, and at every time every other CPU is scheduling. So again there is a contention here. Then comes the third approach. Why not give a separate ready queue to each of the processor? That is the third kind of approach you can use, and again that has its own problems. So every approach has its own pros and cons. It totally depends on the designer and what are the requirements of system, how you should achieve this kind of multi-processor scheduling. What will be the problem there? So they are actually, so in this approach we just discussed, so every processor, there is a global ready queue and every processor can pick its own process. Cache affinity problem is here, right? Any processor can actually pick any process. Then again that cache problem is still there. If I sort of also divide this ready queue amongst processors, so whenever a new process comes, I'll put it in the ready queue of exactly one CPU, right? So that process, it's always going to execute on the same CPU. So the cache problem is solved. I'm now utilizing the cache effectively. Now comes what you are talking about is the load disbalance problem. So let's say there were 10 processes which I gave to CPU 4 and somehow CPU 3 executed all the processes which were given to it. It is idle. But even then, this CPU 4, it cannot give some of its processes to CPU 3 to execute, right? So here is the load disbalancing problem. Again, we have a number of solutions for that. We can also somewhere merge all these different techniques to make the situation more effective. So it is the basic idea. What kind of challenges are there in a kind of multi-processor scheduling algorithm? Now, the things become all the more complicated when you start talking about heterogeneous processors. So as of now, we sort of assumed each of my core is same. So in our laptops, each of our core is same. But what if you are working in a distributed kind of environment and all the processors which you have are actually heterogeneous, they are different. So that is one issue. And again, one more issue which you face there is, so till now, whenever we were talking about the coordination between processes, the processes need to talk to each other. We only talked about the sharing of data, that we need to talk to each other. We need sharing of data. There is one more kind of problem related to the coordination between the processes. They might not need to share the data, but still they might need to coordinate in the sense that there might be some ordering in which they should be done. So we haven't yet even talked about that. So let's say there is a process P1, there is a process P2, and P3 should only execute when P1 and P2 both are done. It should not execute before that. So there we have some more metrics associated with the processes. So when can P3 run? So you look at the P1's completion time, P2's completion time. So P3's allowed execution time will be equal to the maximum of both of their completion time. So let's say P1 runs till 10, P2 runs till 12. So you cannot actually schedule P3 before 12. So how you solve that is with the help of a bit of discrete maths here. You actually make a directed acyclic graph between the processes, which is again stored in your memory. So you have, so I'm not going in too much details there. So these are actually some research areas on which people are still working and still they are publishing papers. So you have a directed acyclic graph, something like this. And based on this directed acyclic graph, you should consider it while scheduling. Right. Okay. And this problem definitely is NP hard. Can someone tell me what is NP hard? Hmm? No? There is no perfect solution. Okay, that is an informal definition, I would say. Can anyone give me a formal definition of what is NP hard problem? Have you done theory of computation? Yes. So that is one thing with operating systems. You need to know computer architecture, computer organization, discrete math, theory of computation, algorithms, almost everything if you want to design an operating system. So go back and look up what is NP hard, right? So I won't say it don't have a perfect solution. It can have a perfect solution, but the point is it is hard to get that perfect solution. And what does hard mean? So hard, as human beings, we know what is hard for a computer. Look at that. When will computer say that, okay, this is hard for me, I cannot do it? Right? When it takes too much time, right? So the idea is you do not have a polynomial time algorithm for solving that particular problem. It's going in exponential time. So we might die and the program will still keep running. It won't give me an output. Okay, there is one more kind of scheduling which I'll quickly discuss. It's called real-time scheduling, and it's also in a heavy use. And the idea is it is very, very different from the scheduling which we have talked till now. So till now, our idea of scheduling was we were trying to be fair to all of these processes. Everyone should get a good response time. Everyone should get a lower waiting time and all that stuff. But as you know, real-time systems are the one where I have to meet some deadlines. So I really do not care about whether I'm fair to these processes or not. I am concerned about that all the deadlines should be met. So as you see in point 2 here, so if you have 5 assignments and there is one which is due in half an hour, you won't say I'll do this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes. Doesn't make sense, right? So whichever assignment is having the deadline, we are first going to do that. So that is the idea of real-time scheduling. It comes in two forms. So the one is asynchronous and other is synchronous or periodic. Asynchronous is when a process can really occur at any time. So let's say it's a fire alarm system. So we don't know when someone will start smoking and the fire alarm system will go off. So that is asynchronous. Synchronous is something where you know the tasks are arriving periodically and you have to serve them periodically, but within a particular deadline. It's not that you can serve them anytime. So the example here is that of a rocket control task. So let's say you have launched a rocket. So after you have launched it, every 50 milliseconds, you have to periodically check it. So you have to run a process which in every 50 milliseconds checks whether the rocket is going in the right direction or not. Right? And to do that, it takes you 8 milliseconds. So 8 milliseconds is a burst time of that task here. And the deadline also is 50 milliseconds. So you should not miss these deadlines. I don't know, maybe occasionally if you miss it will have a huge impact or not. So let's assume that for time being, it's a hard real-time system and you have to meet hard deadlines. So a very good example of this is this here, a cowboy scheduling problem. Right, so what is happening? Assume that I have a horse and a cow and I have to feed them. So the horse, you have to feed it periodically. Every 20 minutes you have to feed it, and feeding it takes 10 minutes time. Right, so you should not miss this 20 minutes deadline. Every 20 minutes you have to do this. If you miss it once, maybe once or twice, it won't have an impact, but if you do it continuously, keep missing it, the horse will die. So for the time being, just assume that this horse is very sensitive and he actually dies if you miss to feed him even once. And then similarly, you have a cow, you have to feed it every 50 minutes. So 50 minutes, every 50 minutes, there is a deadline. And to feed it, it takes you 25 minutes. Now, here see what happens. Solution 1, I'll do a round robin. Okay, so I do not know about real-time scheduling. I say, okay, fine. The scheduling algorithms which I have studied are FCFS, SJF, SRTF, round robin. Let me do a round robin. I'll feed the horse for 10 minutes. I'll feed the cow for 10 minutes. I'll feed the horse for 10 minutes. I'll feed the cow for 10 minutes. Ultimately, horse will die. You can have a fixed priority algorithm. I'll say, okay, feeding the horse is more important than feeding the cow. So every time whenever I can feed the horse, I'll give it a priority and I feed the horse. Ultimately, the cow dies. Right? So these algorithms which we have studied for our normal processor systems, they do not hold for real-time processing. So one of the algorithms which is very heavily used there is called the earliest deadline first. Can you pass a sheet for attendance? Is it on circulation, the attendance sheet? Put it then. You can do it later. Just take a pic and send it in the chat window. Okay. So the algorithm which we use here, it is the. Are you with me? Earliest deadline first. So this is one of the optimal algorithms for real-time systems. Whichever task is having the earliest deadline, you execute it first. There is one more, I'm not going into the details of this. This is called rate monotonic scheduling. So the task which is most frequent, so every task is appearing periodically, you execute that first, right? So these are some of the real-time scheduling algorithms, and what people work on today, it is something like heterogeneous multiprocessor real-time scheduling algorithms. So that is the state of art in scheduling algorithms. I'll just stop here. So tomorrow we will talk about the second primitive, which is synchronization. So we now have a bit idea of how do you do scheduling in a multiprocessor system. Next we'll talk about synchronization. So when we talked about threads, there is a huge problem with threads, and why should you not use them? Some people even say do not use multi-threading at all. What is the problem with multi-threading? Each thread is using the same data, the same files, the same code, right? So I need to have some coordination mechanism. So first of all, there should not be any malicious threads. Anyhow, if I'm writing the whole program, I won't make any malicious threads. But then you can have the race conditions which we talked about. So you need to resolve all of them. You don't want two of your threads to be accessing the same data simultaneously. Given that it is a multi-core system, it can happen. Even if it's not a multi-core system, even then there can be problems when they are running concurrently and a context which happens. The one example which we discussed yesterday. So I'll repeat it again and we'll see how we take care of all those things. So taking care of those things are important if you are going to write a multi-threaded program. And I think eventually you'll have to, because when you take a course in AI or ML, you'll have very big data sets and won't really make sense to sequentially process that data set. Okay, I'll stop here. Online students, any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Manasvi says no. Good. Okay, then we'll meet tomorrow and the session.